California is a state known for its beautiful weather and Hollywood lifestyle, but behind the sunshine and glamour, there's a crisis brewing. California's problems have hit global headlines in recent months, wildfires taking over the city, destroying houses and wiping out people, animals, and destroying hundreds of homes. But the headlines you see in the news aren't the only reason why California is becoming impossible. The sheer cost of living is forcing thousands to leave, and once thriving cities are now facing rising homelessness and crumbling infrastructure. So how did it all come to this? How did California, once a land of opportunity, become a nightmare for so many? As we get into it, please consider subscribing to the channel. The housing crisis. For many residents of California, the problem starts with affordability. From housing to daily essentials, the rising cost of living has become impossible to bear. In 2024, the median home price in California hit $830,000, more than twice the national average. In cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, it's even worse, crossing the $1 million mark. Renters aren't faring much better, with the average monthly rent in Los Angeles now exceeding $2,800. Compared to 2019, when the average rent was $2,200, this represents a 30% increase in just 5 years. Yet, wages haven't kept up with the inflation of house costs, putting home ownership and even renting out of reach for many families. Between 2019 and 2023, California's median household income increased from approximately $78,100 to $89,870, reflecting a growth of about 15%. California was expensive before, but with 30% increase in the average rent and only 15% growth in the average wage, you can see why many Californians and families feel like they're drowning in costs they can't keep up with. Young people are particularly affected. A recent report found that the average age of first-time home buyers in California is now 37, up from 27 a few decades ago. Many remain stuck renting for years, unable to break into the housing market due to tight mortgage requirements and competitive bidding wars. Many people have shared stories of having to attend house viewings with 10 other potential buyers, making it a fiercely competitive market. Mortgage rates in 2024 also climbed to 6.5%, making monthly payments significantly higher than when rates were around 3% in 2020. As home ownership becomes more difficult, demand for rental properties has surged, driving prices up even further. However, demand is only part of the issue. Restrictive zoning laws limit construction to single-family homes in many urban areas, preventing the development of multi-family units and affordable housing. Wealthier neighborhoods often resist new projects through not-in-my-backyard activism, which blocks necessary housing developments. This has contributed to a growing homelessness crisis. But homelessness isn't just about housing. It's also deeply tied to mental health and addiction. Nearly 40% of California's homeless population suffers from unrelated mental illnesses or substance abuse disorders, yet access to mental health care remains limited. In Los Angeles, for example, there are fewer than 50 public mental health beds per 100,000 residents, leaving many to cycle between the streets, hospitals, and jails. Without adequate treatment, breaking the cycle of homelessness becomes nearly impossible. California is home to 171,000 unhoused residents, accounting for 28% of the U.S. homeless population. Yes, you heard that right. Out of all 50 U.S. states, California alone contains around 28%, over a quarter of the homeless population in America. 47%, almost half of these homeless adults in California, are aged 50 or older. A significant amount, around 68% of California's homeless individuals are unsheltered, living in places not intended for habitation, such as streets or abandoned buildings. Tent encampments are expanding in cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, becoming visible symbols of the state's deep affordability problems. The most infamous one being Skid Row, an area that covers roughly 50 city blocks in downtown Los Angeles. Around 5,000 people live on Skid Row, many in tents or makeshift shelters. In interviews, many household residents on Skid Row describe a vicious cycle of eviction, job loss, and deteriorating mental health, such as this man, Luke.
Skid Row hurt me in ways I can't ever explain. It made me do things, it made me see things that I wish I never would have seen. I don't see no other way out. Like I said, I feel like I'm falling and never hitting a bottom, or at least hitting a bottom that's false. And don't judge, because a lot of these people are 2 missed paychecks and no family away from being right here.
For many Californians, these streets once represented opportunity and safety, but for tens of thousands of unhoused Californians, they become a trap from which there's no escape from. For many Californians, the dream of owning a home or even renting comfortably feels impossible. Families are leaving the state in search of better opportunities. But will California ever solve its housing problem, or is it destined to remain a place where only the wealthy can afford to live? In fact, California's wealth gap is one of the largest in the country. On one side, Silicon Valley billionaires and Hollywood elites live in multi-million-dollar mansions such as Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, while thousands of people sleep in tents only miles away. In 2024, the top 10% of earners in California made 14 times more than those in the bottom 10%. That's a level of inequality comparable to many developing nations, including cities like Mumbai, where luxury high-rises overlook sprawling slums. Tech companies like Google, Apple, and Meta have fueled much of the state's economic growth, but they've also driven up housing costs in areas like the San Francisco Bay Area. High-earning tech workers often outbid local residents on homes, forcing middle-income and essential workers, such as teachers and healthcare professionals, out of urban areas. The median home price in San Francisco now exceeds $1.3 million, making home ownership virtually unattainable for the majority of residents. Many essential workers now endure long commutes from distant suburbs, spending hours on the road each day just to afford basic housing. This contributes to staffing shortages in critical services like education and healthcare, further widening the state's economic divide. The inequality is also evident in education. Schools in wealthier neighborhoods benefit from higher property tax revenue and private funding, while schools in low-income areas remain overcrowded and underfunded. Access to healthcare and other public services is similarly uneven, leaving millions of residents without adequate support. This growing gap is driving many families to leave the state. From 2020 to 2024, California experienced a net population loss of over 500,000 residents, many of whom moved to states like Texas, Nevada, and Florida. Without targeted changes to reduce inequality, such as affordable housing, better access to education and healthcare, California risks losing even more of its workforce and middle-class population. If these trends continue, the state may become increasingly polarized between the wealthy elite and those struggling to survive on the streets of California. In California, the rising cost of living isn't limited to housing. Daily expenses like groceries, gas, and utilities have also become a major burden for many residents. Over the past 5 years, these increases have made even basic survival difficult for middle-income and working-class families. Since 2019, grocery prices have risen dramatically. For example, a gallon of milk that used to cost $3.50 now averages over $5 in major cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Essential staples like eggs and bread have seen even sharper increases, with a dozen eggs now priced at around $4.20, nearly double what they were just a few years ago. Restaurants are struggling to cope with rising ingredient costs, forcing them to raise prices or reduce portion sizes. One diner owner in San Diego reported that the cost of eggs nearly doubled in 2024, leading them to increase breakfast menu prices by 15%. Similarly, food banks across California are seeing record demand as more low-income families struggle to afford groceries. Utility bills have also climbed. Electricity costs have risen by approximately 18% over the past 5 years, with Californians now paying around $142 per month on average compared to $103 per month in 2019. During the summer, rolling blackouts due to heat waves and wildfires exacerbate the issue, forcing residents to deal with both unreliable service and increased energy rates. Water bills have also surged due to droughts and infrastructure challenges. Some rural households now pay upwards of $200 a month for water access, a significant expense in areas already struggling with affordability. California continues to have the highest gas prices in the United States. In 2024, gas prices averaged around $5.90 per gallon compared to just $3.60 in 2019. For those with long commutes from distant suburbs, suburbs, many of whom were priced out of urban housing, this adds hundreds of dollars in monthly transportation costs. But many feel public transportation within California isn't good enough to be a reliable, consistent mode of transport. Systems like LA Metro are underfunded and often unreliable, leaving residents heavily dependent on cars. The state's high-speed rail project, intended to connect San Francisco and Los Angeles, has become a symbol of mismanagement. Originally budgeted at $33 billion, costs have ballooned past $100 billion, with completion now delayed until at least the 2030s, which means people will have to stick with the California traffic for at least a while. And if you've ever seen the traffic in California, you'd know traffic congestion is a daily nightmare for many. In Los Angeles, drivers spend an average of 62 hours stuck in traffic annually. Highways like the 405 and 101 have become synonymous with gridlock, yet public transportation options remain limited. California's power grid is also under immense strain. Rolling blackouts have become a regular occurrence during peak demand periods, particularly in summer. In 2019, PG&E preemptively shut off power to millions of residents to prevent wildfires caused by aging infrastructure, prompting widespread frustration. Water infrastructure is similarly vulnerable. Prolonged droughts have placed severe stress on the state's network of reservoirs and aqueducts. In some areas like San Joaquin Valley, residents have faced critical water shortages, forcing them to rely on bottled water deliveries. On top of these issues, California remains at risk of a major earthquake. The San Andreas Fault poses a constant threat, and many older buildings are not retrofitted to withstand a catastrophic quake. Despite investments in infrastructure, the state struggles to keep pace with both population growth and climate challenges. Natural disasters and climate change. Speaking of climate challenges, California is increasingly defined by extreme weather and natural disasters. Wildfires, heat waves, and rising sea levels are reshaping the state's landscape and displacing thousands of residents. In early 2025, wildfires ravaged parts of Los Angeles, destroying over 16,000 structures and causing an estimated $250 billion in damage. Communities in fire-prone regions like Napa Valley, Paradise, and Malibu are regularly forced to evacuate, with many of them losing their homes multiple times. California's wildfire season, which was once a few months long, has now stretched into nearly a year-round phenomenon due to ongoing drought conditions and the drying of forests. As a result, some residents have decided to permanently relocate to states with lower wildfire risks, such as Oregon or Nevada. Insurers have pulled out of high-risk areas, leaving many homeowners without coverage or facing skyrocketing premiums. This has exacerbated the housing affordability crisis as rebuilding becomes financially unfeasible for many. Heat waves have also intensified. In 2024, parts of California hit 134 degrees Fahrenheit in Death Valley, tying the global record for the highest temperature. These extreme conditions are deadly, particularly for vulnerable populations like the elderly and low-income families who may lack access to air conditioning. Imagine facing a 134 degrees Fahrenheit heatwave with no air conditioning because the power has been shut off. That's the reality for thousands during California's rolling blackouts. Hospitals have reported spikes in heat-related illnesses during these periods, while power grids struggle to keep up with increased energy demand. Rising sea levels threaten coastal cities like San Diego and Santa Monica. Flooding and erosion are becoming more frequent, and scientists predict that sea levels could rise by up to 6 feet by 2050, endangering billions of dollars in infrastructure. These climate changes are driving many residents to relocate to safer regions. The state faces mounting pressure to invest in climate resilience before these impacts become even more severe. California is not only losing people, but it's also been losing businesses. Over the past few years, several major companies have packed up and moved their headquarters to other states, citing high taxes, excessive regulations, and the soaring cost of living as key reasons. The tech giant Tesla, for example, relocated to Austin, Texas in 2021, with CEO Elon Musk openly criticizing California's overregulation and complacency. They're not alone. Oracle and Hewlett-Packard, both industry leaders with deep roots in Silicon Valley, also shifted operations to Texas. Other companies have followed suit, choosing states with lower costs, fewer regulatory hurdles, and business-friendly environments. This business exodus is not just about corporate decisions. It's symbolic of a larger problem for California's economy. The departure of high-profile companies means a reduction in job opportunities and tax revenue, making it harder for the state to fund critical services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Some estimates suggest that in just the past few years, California has lost tens of billions in potential economic activity due to these moves. For smaller businesses, the pressure is even greater. Rising operational costs, particularly for rent and energy, have driven many restaurants, shops, and startups to close or relocate. In Los Angeles and San Francisco, small business owners have reported facing rent increases. In July 2024, small business clients experienced an 11% year-over-year increase in rent payments, more than twice the increase for residential rents. In 2024, it was reported 43% of small business owners nationwide were unable to pay their rent in full and on time. It's not just companies making headlines that are leaving. Celebrities, entrepreneurs, and other wealthy residents have also been vocal about their departures. Podcaster Joe Rogan made waves when he moved from California to Texas, citing frustrations with the state's declining quality of life. Just as California is putting immense financial pressure on those of lower-income families, they also seem to be putting financial pressure on those on the other end of the spectrum. This exodus of businesses and individuals isn't just about taxes, it's about quality of life, and with each high-profile departure, California risks losing its valuable tenants to rival states like Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Migration trends. In general, California has experienced significant population loss in recent years. High costs of living, worsening natural disasters, and infrastructure failures are driving residents to other states. However, there is also a counter-trend. Coastal regions with mild climates, such as Santa Barbara and San Diego, are attracting climate migrants from other parts of the country, facing hurricanes and extreme heat. This influx, however, often exacerbates the housing affordability crisis in these areas. The push and pull of migration is reshaping California's demographics and economy, raising the question of whether the state can retain and attract residents in the long term. Despite its challenges, California remains a land of opportunity for many. They just need to handle what seems to be a list of never-ending problems. What do you think? Is the California dream still worth it? Let me know in the comments and click here to watch another video on the channel.